The costs of driving a car have risen at 3 times the rate of inflation, according to new data. The Australian Automobile Association has revealed its latest Transport Affordability Index, showing typical household transport costs rose 13% in 2023. High upfront costs for buying new vehicles, car loan interest rates and insurance premiums are said to be behind the ballooning costs. Jago Dodson is a Professor of Urban Policy and the Director of the Centre for Urban Research at RMIT University, and he joins us now. Professor Dodson, thank you. Now, when we look at those factors, interest rates, insurance, and not to mention that these are imported goods, it's not a surprise, is it, that these costs are skyrocketing?
No, not at all. And I think we need to recognise that for many households who've taken out a loan to purchase a motor vehicle, that's probably the second largest kind of cost expense in their household in terms of indebtedness, and therefore any increase in terms of interest rates is going to disproportionately affect those households.
Yeah, so not a surprise, but certainly causing shock to household budgets, as you say, for individuals, family budgets, no doubt company budgets as well.
Well, that's likely. For companies that run large vehicle fleets, I would imagine that this is also a cost pressure, but also just for your average medium or small business running motor vehicles for their business, they would be facing these pressures as well, which would then follow through into wider inflation in the economy.
So where are these higher costs being felt most acutely?
Well, so these kind of costs are most likely to fall on households who are highly car dependent. And I think it's fair to say that Australian cities overall are highly car dependent. They're amongst the most car dependent in the world. But that car dependence is distributed unevenly. So inner urban areas tend to be less reliant on automobiles with access to public transport and greater feasibility of walking and cycling. But in the outer and fringe suburbs of our major cities, where we've seen relatively poor investment in public transport and where the urban form doesn't really support active travel, those areas are very much exposed to cost pressures from automobile travel.
Now, this has been a pretty fast driving up of costs here, but is there any evidence of behaviour change where that is an option for people?
Look, it's a bit hard to say. I don't think we have good enough data at this point over the short term that these costs have been going up to really be able to say that there has been an identifiable change in behaviour. What we would expect, though, is that households would be starting to change their consumption in other areas of spending. Transport is one of the most essential kind of aspects of a household budget, along with food and housing costs, such as paying back a mortgage. Where we would be likely to see the behaviour changing would be less in the travel, but more around reducing consumption in other areas, such as discretionary spending on clothes, on retail, on hospitality and entertainment and those kind of things.
Yeah, so is that key there then, that there aren't easy alternatives in the transport space for many?
Until we see widespread rollout of improved public transport that gives households a bit of an alternative as a hedge against rising car cost pressures, we're not likely to see too dramatic cutbacks in travel behaviour, except in very discretionary areas where people might choose not to go and visit their friends on the weekend, for example, because they can't afford to. We're more likely to see the cost pressures manifest in cutbacks in spending in other areas of household budgets.
Now, you've gone some way to answer this with that public transport, but what could alleviate this, both short-term or long-term?
It's very difficult to alleviate these kind of pressures in the short term because rolling out public transport is a multiple decades kind of long exercise, and governments aren't necessarily given over to trying to subsidise car travel, at least in terms of loan costs or petrol costs. I think in the longer term, though, we do need to be really thinking about the sustainability of our transport systems and the affordability of them. And there are great disparities within our cities in terms of the distribution of good quality public transport. And it tends to coincide in terms of areas where public transport is less well provided. Those also tend to be the less affluent areas of our cities. So not only are these cost pressures difficult for households, the burden falls typically more on less affluent households. So we really need to be thinking through, in terms of the future of our cities, our metropolitan planning and our transport planning, how we can provide better public transport in the outer and fringe suburbs, not waiting decades and decades after development has occurred and people have moved into new estates to provide those services.